It is a heavy, quiet realization that often arrives right in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. You are sitting there, perhaps looking out the window, perhaps reviewing a spreadsheet, and the thought surfaces. This is it. It is not a moment of dramatic crisis, not the kind you see in movies. It is far more subtle, a psychological gravity settling in the chest, the feeling of emotional exhaustion that no amount of sleep seems to cure. You are not physically tired, necessarily, but profoundly worn out from maintaining the architecture of the life you have built. For those of us who have always prided ourselves on preparation, on critical thinking, on following the trajectory that was supposed to lead to fulfillment, this exhaustion is confusing. We did the work. We made the responsible choices. We checked the boxes society provided: education, career stability, partnership, home. And yet the engine of internal motivation has begun to sputter, or perhaps it has simply stopped, idling in neutral while the scenery continues to rush past. This is the central paradox of midlife success. The smart person, the diligent planner, often finds themselves the most psychologically stuck. The reason is simple, but difficult to accept. We became so proficient at solving external problems that we neglected the internal landscape. We optimized for efficiency, promotion, and accumulation. We did not optimize for resonance, for meaning, or for simple, quiet contentment. The structure of feeling stuck isn't a lack of options. It is a lack of appetite for the options that remain. You know you could change jobs. You could move cities. You could start a new hobby. But those suggestions feel hollow, like applying a tiny bandage to a deep structural flaw. The core disappointment isn't with the job or the city. The disappointment is the slow, quiet realization that the rewards you chased do not taste the way you were promised they would. This frustration is often silent because it is deeply embarrassing. How do you explain to your friends, who see your stable life and enviable security, that you feel like a tourist in your own existence? You cannot complain without sounding ungrateful, and so the frustration turns inward, becoming a dull, persistent anxiety that shadows every accomplishment. We begin to live with what might be called the weight of the done. Everything we set out to do has, in large part, been done. The mountain has been climbed, but instead of the grand view, there is just a cloudy, empty plateau. There is no new horizon demanding immediate action, and without that pressure, the internal system, which was trained purely on achieving, loses its purpose. We were taught that movement equals progress. In midlife, we learn that relentless, undirected movement is just friction. The psychological shift that happens around 40 is profound. Until that point, life is primarily defined by addition. We add skills, add relationships, add responsibilities, add possessions. Our identity is constructed by what we are becoming. After 40, the process flips. The next necessary phase is often defined by subtraction. We must figure out what to let go of, what to simplify, what attachments are no longer serving the actual self, but merely serving the image we built for others 20 years ago. This subtraction is terrifying because it feels like failure. Letting go of a high-status but soul-crushing job feels like admitting defeat. Changing a long-standing routine or withdrawing from an exhausting social commitment feels like weakness. We confuse identity with maintenance. We believe we are the things we hold on to. This leads to the great midlife stalemate. We are too exhausted to continue maintaining the facade, but too afraid to dismantle it. We are frozen in the middle of a life that is too comfortable to abandon, but too heavy to truly enjoy. The intelligent mind, seeking a solution, often makes things worse. We try to intellectualize our way out of emotional distress. We analyze the situation, create pros and cons lists, and read books on productivity or stoicism, believing that if we can just find the perfect philosophical framework, the feeling will dissipate. But the feeling of being stuck is rarely a logical problem. It is an emotional and spiritual one, rooted in the discrepancy between the person you are now and the commitments made by the person you were then. The younger self, full of ambition and ignorance, signed contracts that the present self finds impossible to honor without significant internal cost. These contracts include relationship roles, career trajectories, debt levels, and even deeply internalized beliefs about what a successful life must look like. When we reach this impasse, excitement dies first. The anticipation for the next promotion, the next purchase, the next holiday, it loses its charge. This loss of excitement is actually a critical signal. It is the ego, tired of chasing external carrots, finally refusing to participate. What often replaces excitement is a quiet yearning for meaning. Not meaning in the grand cosmic sense, but meaning in the mundane. Does this routine matter? Does this conversation matter? Does the way I spend this Tuesday afternoon align with anything of substance? This shift from accumulation to essence requires a completely different psychological skill set. It requires patience, introspection, and a willingness to sit with boredom and discomfort, which is exactly what the highly efficient mind is trained to avoid. We are masters of distraction, adept at filling every space with activity so we never have to hear the silence inside. That silence, however, is where the new clarity resides. Many internal conflicts at this stage revolve around the concept of duty versus desire. We have spent decades prioritizing duty to family, to employer, to financial stability. We were told that if we handle the duties successfully, desire will be the reward. But when the time comes to pursue desire, we often find two things. First, we no longer remember what our authentic desires are. And second, the existing duties have become so entrenched, so dependent on our constant performance, that stepping away feels like an act of betrayal. Consider the relationship dynamic after 20 years. The initial passionate connection often matures into a partnership based on shared logistics, mutual history, and silent expectation. For the smart, emotionally mature person, the conflict arises when the relationship is objectively fine, stable, dependable, functional, but internally, it feels like a well-managed corporation rather than a deeply felt connection. How do you articulate the quiet disappointment of comfort? You look at your partner and you see the history, the shared sacrifices, and the profound goodness. But you also feel the distance, the routines, and the conversations that circle the same predictable topics. The internal voice whispers, "Is this all there is?" This question is dangerous because it implies failure, when in reality, it is simply a natural stage of growth. The problem is not the relationship itself. The problem is the assumption that the relationship should continue to provide the same intense feelings it did when both parties were still defining themselves. The stuckness in relationships often comes from resisting the inevitable evolution. We are afraid to renegotiate the terms of engagement because the current terms, though unsatisfying, are predictable. Renegotiation demands vulnerability and the admission that the person you married is no longer the person you are, and vice versa. This kind of honesty feels too disruptive, so we opt for the quiet disappointment of routine instead. The same principle applies to work and identity. By 45 or 50, many intelligent people have reached a level of professional competence where their work is easy, predictable, and even lucrative. They are experts. But expertise often leads to repetition, and repetition kills growth. We become masters of the system we inhabit, but we realize that the system itself might be meaningless. We trade our time, our most valuable non-renewable resource, for comfort, not challenge. The soul starves for challenge, for the feeling of being truly engaged and pushed, but the ego prefers the safety of competence. The internal conflict here is between legacy and utility. We want to be useful, but increasingly, we are concerned with what we will leave behind. What was the point of all that specialized knowledge if it only optimized the bottom line for someone else? This is where the search for purpose deepens. Purpose is not found in adding more to the schedule. It is usually found in removing obstacles to clarity. When we feel stuck, we often look for a grand, dramatic solution, the new career, the radical move. But clarity rarely arrives in a thunderclap. It arrives in the slow realization of what you are no longer willing to tolerate. The acceptance required here is crucial. It is acceptance without resignation. Resignation is the surrender to the current state. This is my life now, and it will always be heavy. Acceptance without resignation is the quiet, sober recognition of reality. This is where I am, emotionally and psychologically. I accept that the map I followed was incomplete, but I am still the cartographer of the path ahead. This acceptance allows for a shift in focus. Instead of trying to force excitement back into old structures, we focus on reintegration. Reintegration means reconnecting the logical, achieving mind with the emotional, sensing self. For decades, the achieving self was in control, demanding performance, and suppressing any feeling that interfered with efficiency, like doubt, sadness, or the longing for stillness. Now, the suppressed self is demanding attention, and it speaks in the language of fatigue, apathy, and feeling lost. To become unstuck, we must first honor the exhaustion. We must treat the fatigue not as a flaw to be overcome by willpower, but as necessary intelligence. The fatigue is the internal system signaling that the current operating parameters are unsustainable. The practical work of becoming unstuck begins with micro-revolutions, not massive overhauls. It means carving out small pockets of unscheduled time that is not dedicated to maintenance, productivity, or consumption. Time simply to exist and observe. This is extremely uncomfortable for the mind that is trained to optimize every minute. We must learn to tolerate the anxiety of wasting time. It is in these wasted moments that the true self often whispers. We realize that the identity we have been protecting is not the self, but merely the defense mechanism built up over decades. The high achiever, the reliable partner, the indispensable employee, these are roles. They are necessary for navigating the world, but they are not the essence of the human experiencing them. When we feel lost, it often means we have temporarily lost contact with our own essence. The world has defined us so thoroughly that we have forgotten how to define ourselves. Clarity, therefore, is not about finding a new grand purpose. It is about establishing psychological sovereignty. It is the steady, quiet process of reclaiming the right to decide what matters, regardless of external validation. This process involves reviewing 3 main areas where internal conflicts are most common after 40: time, connection, and energy expenditure. Regarding time, we must ruthlessly audit our routines, distinguishing between activities that, feed the soul and activities that feed the facade. This requires saying no to things that are perfectly good, perfectly reasonable, but simply do not resonate with the human you are becoming. The older we get, the more precious time becomes, and the higher the internal cost of spending it on things we secretly resent. Regarding connection, the feeling of being stuck is often compounded by loneliness, even when surrounded by people. We maintain relationships out of history or obligation, but we rarely risk the vulnerability needed for true connection. True connection requires allowing yourself to be truly seen, including the parts that are doubting, tired, or unsure. This is harder than it sounds because we have spent so long presenting the competent version of ourselves. Redefining connection often means reducing the sheer number of superficial interactions and deepening the few that remain. Regarding energy expenditure, we must stop confusing effort with value. The intelligent person often believes that the harder something is, the more valuable it must be. In midlife, we must learn the opposite lesson. True value often lies in simplicity, ease, and flow. If a process requires immense, constant struggle, it might not be a worthy challenge. It might just be the wrong fit for the current life. We must learn to conserve energy for what genuinely moves us, rather than exhausting ourselves on maintaining the expectations of the past. The silent frustration of midlife often stems from the tyranny of potential. We feel stuck because we know we are capable of more, or at least capable of different. The expectation of continued growth, which was a motivator in our 20s, becomes a heavy burden when we realize that growth might mean deconstructing what we currently have, rather than building on top of it. This deconstruction is necessary because the self is always changing, whether we acknowledge it or not. The person who decided on your career 20 years ago had different needs, different fears, and operated within a different cultural context. To force the present self to honor those outdated contracts is a profound act of self-neglect. The goal is not to achieve perpetual happiness or unending excitement. That is an adolescent fantasy. The goal is to achieve congruence, a state where the internal reality aligns reasonably well with the external expression. Congruence brings calm. Calm is the mature replacement for excitement. Calm means the absence of internal fighting. It means the achieving mind and the sensing heart have finally agreed to a truce. They are working together, accepting that life is inherently complex, often disappointing, and ultimately finite. This understanding of finitude is perhaps the most powerful catalyst for becoming unstuck. When we truly accept that the sand glass is half empty, the trivialities that once absorbed all our energy, the unnecessary social comparisons, the pursuit of small status symbols, the fear of minor disapproval, begin to lose their power. We start to notice what is truly irreplaceable: time spent in genuine presence, moments of quiet, understanding, the integrity of our own choices. The process of moving forward from this plateau does not look like a sudden leap. It looks like a gradual turning, a slow correction, of course. It involves small, deliberate choices made purely for the sake of integrity, without regard for the immediate perceived outcome or the opinions of others. It might involve choosing rest over productivity. It might involve choosing authenticity over stability in a crucial conversation. It might involve choosing silence over the need to always have the smartest answer. The mature journey is one of increasing simplicity and diminishing illusion. We stop believing in the fairy tales of effortless transformation. We stop looking for magic formulas. We accept that the work is internal, quiet, and requires a profound degree of self-compassion, which is often the hardest thing for the highly critical, intelligent mind to muster. To be stuck after 40 is not a failure of intelligence. It is a sign that the soul is demanding a renegotiation of terms. It is an invitation to transition from living a life that looks good on paper to living a life that simply feels true. This shift, more than any external achievement, defines the second half of life. It requires clarity, patience, and the courage to disappoint the expectations of the ghost of the younger self, and it is a transition worth the exhaustion it took to arrive here.